All right. So I'm Colin, and I have a question for all of you. How many of you have heard this phrase in civic tech? Delivery is the strategy. Yeah? Okay, good. How many people work at a place that has that kind of a philosophy a little bit? Yeah, a little bit? Okay, that's fine. Well, I've spent the last few years doing civic tech research and design in some pretty delivery-focused outfits. I worked at 18F in the US federal government. I also worked at the National Park Service, which, believe it or not, is pretty delivery-focused. And in these places, success is really measured by whether you put something out the door that people can use, that you shipped something that day, that week, that month. But the thing is that just shipping doesn't always seem to work. I noticed that sometimes bad things start to happen when delivery is the only strategy. Even though it's become part of the civic tech gospel, I think it may not be totally divine. So why is that? Well, I started to see a few things happening in places that were just focusing on pushing out products, getting products online to help people. Number one is that they sort of start to die on the vine. They're beautiful at first, but then they aren't maintained and they kind of start to wilt. And so recently I went to look at a website I shipped for a government agency with a really talented team. It was really beautiful. And when I went to this website, it sort of looked like this. This is not a real thing, but I started to weep because all the plain language was gone, the design by committee logo was awful. What the heck happened, right? Well, what happened was I called the team and they just stopped doing everything that we taught them to do. They stopped talking to users. They stopped fighting back on convoluted language from their legal department. They just went back to what they were doing before. And that's when I figured out problem number two was sort of just focusing on delivery, is that often people's behavior doesn't change. When you leave at the end of the day, the product just goes back to where it was. The product starts to show that people's behaviors haven't changed. But why doesn't it change? Well, I went to grab coffee with a good friend at the agency, and she told me, well, here's the thing, Colin. Those folks were mostly just really relieved when you left. They were just happy that you were gone. So it turns out that focusing on delivery over everything else had really ticked off our partners in the government agency. They didn't feel any obligation to us. In fact, the only aha moment they had was that they really didn't want to work with us anymore. Okay? So that's when I realized we really have it slightly wrong. It's products over politics and over all the mess that gets in the way of building. But even more important than shipping a product is building relationships. Building those relationships. And so products don't transform agencies, relationships do. And the reason I say that is agencies are full of people. Those people are what create the products and tools and services that interact with the public. And so the only way to transform those is to create warm relationships with the people inside those agencies. If you want them to take your advice, if you want them to shift their habits, their ways of working, if you want them to create new structures that enable human-centered design, you have to start with relationship building. So how do you do it? Well, I'm going to call it relationships. Actually, really don't call it that, but do think of it as a deliberate practice. I told you this would be provocative. It's something that we need to think about deliberately. And what I mean by that is, first of all, don't stop building products. Products are a great way to start the conversation about what people need and what the history of a problem at a place is. And ultimately, they are what helps most people. Most people come into contact with these products. But number two, shut the heck up when you start building them. The only thing allowed out of your mouth as a technologist during those first discussions should be questions. Ask lots of them. Learn the context and the history of the work that you've done. And then number three, your new mantra should become, every bad decision had a good reason at the time. And your job isn't to prove that those decisions were all bad. It's to learn new ways, better ways to address those reasons. So in sum, I think delivery is not enough strategy. It's a great results-oriented philosophy, but we need a little bit more than that for civic tech, a little bit more than that for our movement. And so what I'm advocating is that we think about building relationships, not just products. Put more effort into building the warm and trusting relationships that accompany our products. And we start that by saying less, asking more questions, and being more thoughtful about what's come before us. And with that, thank you very much. I'd love to continue the conversation here on Twitter, and if you are interested in government, cloud, or DevOps, 18F asked me to plug it and say, come talk to me. There's an opportunity there. If you're Canadian or Canada curious, also come talk to me. And also, if you're interested in working at the Center for Civic Design, which is an amazing place, also talk to me. Thank you.